Alright, so we're back in the world of Crimson Desert, and today guys, it's time we talk about progression and the progression system, as this has been a pretty hot topic over on social media about how Crimson Desert works. For those of you who are not familiar with how things are working, currently the team behind Crimson Desert, Prolibus, has been making a pretty big effort to kind of distance themselves from calling the game a traditional RPG, and more so a action RPG. And the reason for this is because how the core systems of the game fundamentally work. They work very differently from how a traditional RPG works, and so they wanted to make that clear distinction. A lot of players are not exactly sure what these systems are and how they differ. I'm going to be just breaking down all the systems, all the pillars of progression and things like that, and then give you guys a better understanding of how it works so you're in the know. As always guys, if you like this kind of video, you're interested in Crimson Desert, make sure to drop a like as well as subscribe to the channel, because we're going to be covering it pretty in depth up until the launch. And with that, let's actually talk about the systems of progression. In order to talk about how the progression works, we need to actually talk about how it doesn't work, because that's just as important. So the way it doesn't work is there's no leveling, and there's no traditional quest giver that's going to give you a quest that said, go do this X thing. And when you do this X thing, I'm going to give you an X amount of experience for you to allocate certain stats and benefits to your character that will give you flat stat increases as you level up. Your gear have a set level requirement where you need to have a certain level to pick up and use that kind of gear. This does not exist in Crimson Desert. There may be some form of stat checks. There's nothing that's tied to a level requirement, and that's kind of the core fundamental differences. The things you're going to be doing in the world actually is going to be the way you actually scale your progression and your character to be much stronger. So what this means is just slamming out the MSQ may not provide you with enough power and skills to be able to just actively be able to do all the content comfortably. That's not to say you can't do it without doing those things, but we'll talk about that in a second. But generally speaking, the MSQ is, in my opinion, probably won't be as important as like the open world exploration and doing things and interacting with the world versus like actually just slamming out certain quests to gain power. Now, obviously, this is important to talk about because we're going to be talking about enemy scaling, and enemy scaling is going to be handled in a not so traditional way when it comes to like RPGs, but closer to an ARPG. Depending on the zone that you're in at the time, since there's 5 major regions from what I recall, there's going to be difficulty dependent on that region, not dependent on the enemy that you're facing at the time. So they're not going to be scaling with you or anything or nonsense like that. When you get strong, you're going to get stronger than that first region, and you're going to outscale it because you're getting stronger. So the first region obviously is going to provide with some good skills and items and gear, but once you get to the second region, there's very likely going to be a lot of change in your gear, a lot of change in your scaling, and some of the vendors very likely as well are going to offer more options, more items, more benefits, and things like that. We're going to talk about those in just a second, but every single region is going to have their own individual scaling, and that's how you're going to determine how powerful you are or how you can contend. Now, from the way that the team has talked, you can go immediately to the second region unless there's like a story beat that prevents you from doing it. You need to fly there, or a story beat that prevents that kind of progression. So if you wanted to, you could go all the way from the first zone all the way to the final zone and absolutely do it. But obviously, enemies are going to have more gear. They're going to have bigger quantities of enemies. They're probably going to be tougher archetypes, things like that. Obviously, the world is going to be much harder in the fifth region versus the first region. And that's kind of how the enemy scaling should be working. Now, the other way, or the other pillar of progression, is going to be drops. First off, obviously, the bosses are going to drop gear that is going to be generally more powerful than normal gear. Once again, if you're exploring the world, you're interacting, you're going out of your way to like actually fight things, you'll run into these stronger, more elite enemies that will drop better gear. That's not to say that normal enemy drops isn't going to be valuable, but obviously if they have tailored bosses who have unique skills and unique abilities and unique gear, you're going to want to take on bosses to get those gear, and it's going to be better. Now, in addition to this, since the enemy scaling will work depending on where you are in the world, normal enemy drops will still have value. Obviously, a good portion of that is probably going to be used for money or materials, crafting stuff. You're probably going to smelt it down or disassemble it, depending on if that system exists. I don't want to like tell you it's in the game and it's not. But obviously, if you go to the second region and you just got a few boss drops that was like, I don't know, enough for your helmet or your chest, and then you go to the next region where the difficulty does ramp up and you get like a glove drop, obviously that's going to still be pretty good because it's the next difficulty region. And that's how the normal gear still is going to retain its relevance, as well as like crafting with it and or doing things with it with vendors. Now, Abyss artifacts are going to be something you find throughout the open world, which we're going to talk about in a second. But the way Abyss artifacts fundamentally work is they're going to give you flat stat bonuses and increases to your gear, and possibly, as we haven't seen this, I have no reason to believe not like otherwise that it wouldn't exist, possibly different moves, skills, and abilities tied to Abyss artifacts. So from what we can confirm, we have seen that there were stamina increases and HP increases. Now, while obviously that's a survivability flat damage, I guess utility increase, we've not seen the whole entire wheel, so there's very likely going to be stat bonuses like damage, things like that, that can increase your character's power. So obviously Abyss artifacts are going to be one of the most important scaling tools for your character beyond just survivability. I kind of want to kind of point that out because someone said that survivability is kind of what Abyss artifacts are only for, and that's not the case. They're going to have other stat requirements. We just only seen stamina and health, so I want to make that important distinction. Now, how are we going to find these Abyss artifacts? Well, there's going to be exploration. As you go around the world, you will run into points of interest, different things. If you ever played a game like Breath of the Wild, I always bring this up. If you ever played Zelda Breath of the Wild, then you probably played systems like this where you go to different points of interest and you do certain type of like puzzle solving kind of things where you do that. I'm not a big fan of that kind of thing, but obviously that's going to be an angle in it. There's going to be quests, possibly tied to the MSQ, but very likely side quests as well. The Abyss, the sky areas, you're going to obviously find them there because that's kind of the name of the game. And then whenever you go to outposts as well as clearing out strongholds, you should expect to see these Abyss artifacts kind of sitting there because obviously people want this because it has some form of power. So that's going to be the major ways to get Abyss artifacts that we know now. But that's going to be a major thing you're going to be doing. If you're someone who's actively just slamming out the MSQ, obviously you're going to run past this stuff. You're going to miss those stat bonuses and you're not going to get as strong as someone who's done exploration through the whole world. And that's what this game really wants to encourage players to engage with the world, move around with the world and actively engage. And that's how you actually make your character stronger. You don't have to, but it's going to be much more comfortable if you do so. This, in addition to Abyss gear socketing, is also going to be another thing to keep in mind. We have seen some information and some screenshots, and I'll have it playing in the background for you to see, where there will be Abyss gear that you can use to allocate certain, I'm going to call them sockets, like gems or jewels, but you can put into gear that you have to give them passive stat bonuses. So from what we've seen the mention of X thing 1, so it was like Gale 1, Gale 2, and this gave increased attack speed or attack damage. I forget, I think Gale was attack speed. And these are obviously going to be important because they're going to provide different stat bonuses if you have multiple pieces of gear with multiple amounts of these. And I think in the footage that we saw, the sword had 3 slots, meaning you could put 3 jewels in just the sword. That's not to say the shield can't get it. If you're running sword and board, your armor can't get it. Things like that. Obviously, that is a lot of power on the table, and if you're going to the MSQ and you're not actually interacting with those systems, power is going to be significantly less. And I know I keep reiterating this because I really want to make sure people understand that exploration is a key part of the game. And I'm sure most of you want to do that, so it's not a big deal, but I did want to point that out. Anyway, double backing to what we said, you're going to be taking these Abyss gear sockets to the enchanter, which the lady looks like an enchanter to me. And you're going to basically enchant this onto gear. I would like to hope that you can pull it out and or upgrade it later, but we'll see how that goes. And that's going to obviously give you some passive benefits in terms of your character. This also brings us to the other pillar of progression, and that is going to be just observing enemies in the world. If you've ever played Where Winds Meet, and if you're a watcher of the channel, you probably have, then when you look at certain enemies, certain bosses, and certain people in the world, they will have certain moves that you as a player could, in theory, take and use part of your kit that isn't exclusive to like stat allocation that you can get from like artifacts. You actually learn it. So another pillar of progression is just simply interacting with the world and interacting with people. While we're talking about crafting and things like that, there's going to be some more obvious, more, I guess, subtle ways to gain things, but obviously there's going to be able to get it from just interacting with quest givers, side quests, and quest givers. They're probably going to give you gear as a reward, which can be valuable, I guess. In addition to this, there's just going to be general vendors who are going to sell gear. So go up to a vendor, buy the item that you want, possibly enchant it beyond what you get, which would probably be good because there's going to be affixes on gear, which obviously you want to do. And then of course you're going to have a blacksmith who's going to be able to gear craft, and or you, after you go gather, could gear craft the gear yourself, which very likely is going to be just as powerful as drops. I'm a player who enjoys like going out and fighting bosses and getting their affixes specifically, but if they have a good gear crafting system, obviously for those of you who likes to do gathering, because we've seen that there's hunting, there's smithing, there's things like that where the player can engage in, then you'll be able to actually craft and handcraft your own gear, which could be even more powerful depending on how the team handles this. Now, in closing, I did want to talk about one thing that is important, or at least a talking point that has been brought up a few times, and that is the idea of going through the game, doing the most minimum of things, and being able to complete the game. Now, recently, Will Powers, the marketing director behind Crimson Desert, did say that the player could, in theory, just pound out the game. They're having a hard time. They're going into a mission, and they don't feel like they're strong enough. And you just get good and you can do it, like that traditional Souls, like throw your head at it, slam it out until you finally get it kind of placed down. I know a lot of people don't like that, generally don't like that. I like when a fight is challenging but not over the top, where you have to play perfect for 25 minutes. Like that gets kind of annoying after a while. But it does look like Will Power said that you as a player could, in theory, do that kind of thing if you want that. I will say, for me, I would probably take that mention with a grain of salt, because he's the marketing director, not like the creative director, right? He's not the one like playing all the time. And so I don't know how much I would put a lot of stake into that word. If I had to make an educated guess on what he means, because obviously his team is feeding him information, is if you're not exploring in the open world as much as others, you're just slamming out the MSQ and you're, just kind of getting residual gear drops from stuff like that, then obviously you're probably going to have a much harder time, and you could, in theory, go with that Dark Souls, like slam it out until you get it, play perfect for 30 minutes straight kind of playstyle. You could do that, but you're still going to have a hard time. And I don't think he means that if you walk around with level 1 gear and you're in the 5th zone, you'll be able to do. I don't think that's what he means. I think it means that if you're doing the minimum amount of investment into like progression on your character, you should be able to do it. If you just persevere and you slam your head against it, it's going to be harder, but it's going to be able to be done. I'm assuming you're going to be able to still be able to complete it as long as you still do the bare minimum, not completely ignore everything, right? Anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for this video. I think that gives you guys a brief understanding of the core progression systems in Crimson Desert. Again, the important distinction here is it is not a traditional RPG, it's an ARPG. The effort you put in is going to dictate how much power your character have, and if you want an easier or harder time, just explore the world and play. That's kind of the thing. Most of you are probably going to do that anyway, so it's not a big deal. But for those of you who want to know, that's how the gameplay systems and progression actually work. Now, as always, guys, if you did find the video helpful, make sure to drop me a like. That helps me out a ton. And yeah, I'm going to be covering a lot of Crimson Desert, so if you're subscribed, you'll be able to keep up with videos just like this one, where I actually break down the systems and kind of explain to you how it generally works. As always, I do appreciate you stopping by, and just like that, guys, I will see you in the next Crimson Desert video very soon.